Deputy David Cullinane, please.
This omnibus bill is the bare minimum needed in terms of Brexit planning. It is a steady-state solution and one which does not plan adequately for the economic consequences of a hard crash by Britain from the European Union. This is despite the fact that the bill is being portrayed as a comprehensive response to the disruption that Brexit will bring. However, it does not engage with the realities that many businesses and citizens will find themselves in. A no-deal Brexit, Taoiseach, would lead to 50,000 job losses in the first year, and that's according to data from the state and from all of the think tanks that have looked at the consequences of Brexit economically. Where are the provisions for this potential disaster? The majority of these job losses will be in the agri-food sector, yet on this the bill is silent. Brexit does not just affect businesses, of course, it affects communities and people as well, and any Brexit strategy which is worth its salt needs to reflect and address this reality. Sinn Féin believes in a dual strategy for dealing with a no-deal Brexit. The first is to mitigate its effects in the short term through state measures. Second is to overcome any disruption through medium to long-term investment in capital and social infrastructure. In terms of the North, the Taoiseach has consistently stated that there will be no hardening of the border and our agreements must be protected. And we accept and we acknowledge those statements from the Taoiseach. Instead of a hard border, the people North and South, in our view, should be given the opportunity to remove the border once and for all. That is a democratic thing to do, and it's also the right thing to do. Taoiseach, partition has failed. It has failed our country, and Brexit has shown that the British Parliament has not acted and will not act in the interests of Ireland. The people of the North voted to stay in the European Union. We want to ensure that the entire island stays in the European Union. So it is not only prudent but imperative that the Irish Government begins to plan to give effect to the promise of the Good Friday Agreement, to plan for a referendum and to plan to win a referendum. Taoiseach, why does the Government close its mind to any planning on Irish unity? We call for a forum to be established, to have a discussion on how we plan the transition to Irish unity. The Government says no. We call for the Government to bring forward a white paper to again set out the stepping stones necessary to create a united Ireland. The Government says no. It's part of the Good Friday Agreement. If you want to deliver on all aspects of the Good Friday Agreement, you have to recognise that the holding of a border poll to unite this country is one part of that. This omnibus bill is being presented as what the state needs to do to protect this country in the event of a hard crash. But the biggest issue facing this state and facing the island of Ireland if there is a hard crash is what happens at the border. Now, we don't accept you can solve all of those problems in an omnibus bill. But we do say that the Government is closing its mind to the most obvious solution which is available to the Irish people, North and South, in the event of a hard crash, World Trade Organization rules applying, and then having chaos for businesses and for farmers and for citizens either side of the border. Why is the Irish Government, and indeed Fianna Fáil, afraid of Irish unity, afraid of having a debate on Irish unity, afraid even to plan for Irish unity and not take any practical steps? And only you, Minister, can account for that for your party and Fianna Fáil from theirs. This is again why we call on the Government to convene a forum to begin planning for Irish unity. In terms of this bill, and I did meet with yourself and your colleagues on this, we will engage constructively, and we mean that sincerely, to work with you to progress this bill, but also to strengthen it. We will also be seeking clarifications on some matters to ensure that the bill is fit for purpose and adequately addresses the full range of issues thrown up by a no-deal Brexit. While we will not be seeking to delay any necessary legislation, we will not be giving the Government a blank cheque. I do want to say, Minister, that we support most of the provisions of this bill. And for those TDs who represent border counties, they know that these provisions are necessary. They are the bare minimum, but they're necessary to ensure continued access to services in health and in education, to ensure that the all-island economy is protected, all-island public transport, all-island energy. All of that is absolutely necessary, and we accept that. So we don't have a quarrel with you, Minister, or the Government in relation to many provisions of the bill, but we will certainly seek to expand on them. But we don't believe the bill does enough to invest in the Irish economy. it doesn't do enough to support small to medium-sized businesses. It doesn't do enough to make sure that we protect ordinary citizens from the worst effects of Brexit. And I have to point out to you, Taoiseach, that in whatever form Brexit takes, it is going to mean economic shocks for Ireland. There will be economic turbulence. Now, obviously, that turbulence would be greater if there is a no-deal scenario. But one of the quarrels we do have with you, Minister, is that the planning has to be in the event of whatever form Brexit takes. Businesses need to be supported. Not just a hard crash. There's many businesses who are exporters who are struggling as we speak. There are many in the agri-food sector who are struggling as we speak. There are many in other sectors of the economy who are struggling as we speak because of currency fluctuations, and yet there is no hard, tangible, practical solutions or practical measures or investments or supports, financial or otherwise, that are in this bill that gives any comfort to those businesses, Minister. What the Omnibus bill does do is it covers 9 departments: health, business, enterprise and innovation, communications, climate action and environment, education and skills, finance, transport, tourism and sport, employment affairs and social protection, the Department of the Taoiseach, and justice and equality. And while the range of issues covered gives the impression that this is a comprehensive bill, in reality there is a simple and yes necessary theme and objective that runs through the bill. Overall, the purpose of the bill is to allow certain Irish Government departments to treat Britain as if it is a treaty country in the event of a no-deal Brexit. This applies to the North as well. It is to avoid Britain becoming, in certain aspects of Irish law and policy, a third country. We are going to spend 5 or 6 days discussing this bill, but in essence that's the purpose and the objective of the bill, and we obviously support that. The one major exception is with the Department of Communications, which I will come back to later. So, for example, in health, the Government proposes to amend the Health Act 1970 and the Health Act 2004 to enable healthcare arrangements to be maintained between Ireland and Britain, including reimbursement arrangements in the case of a no-deal Brexit. The Common Travel Area facilitates access to health services in both states, including access to emergency, routine and planned care, and the bill seeks to put in place an appropriate legal framework in the Irish state to ensure the continuation of the Common Travel Area arrangements in respect of healthcare. In terms of student supports, the bill proposes to ensure continuity of the current commitments to maintaining the rights and privileges bestowed by the Common Travel Area and eligibility for SUSI grants, even in the event of a no-deal Brexit. Again, in terms of continuity, we have a section on cross-border bus services, amendment to the Harbours Act and amendments to the Protection of Employees Act 1984 in order to protect workers where an insolvency happens. In all of this, there is nothing new being proposed, which, when you think about it, is quite strange, as Brexit will be very new and is going to be durable and lasting for the people of this state, for businesses in this state and for citizens not just in this state but across the island. And while it is important to ensure continuity, it is also important to ensure preparedness for the discontinuity that Brexit brings with it. And that, Taoiseach, is just common sense. The one area where the Omnibus Bill delves into this is in the section on business supports. The Government proposes a series of amendments to the Industrial Development Acts 1986 to 2014. These will give Enterprise Ireland the power to offer enhanced support to companies involved in research and development. It will also allow Enterprise Ireland to lend, participate in certain types of follow-on investments and ensure that the organisation can apply for government approval for individual investment amounts or loans in excess of £7.5 million. These measures differ from those originally proposed in the heads of bill, especially around the need to extend state aid rules to normal EU levels. And if I can just pause at that point for 1 second, Minister, because myself and my colleague Maurice Quinlivan discussed this, and we were taken aback, to say the least, that the Government does not already avail of the flexibility in relation to state aid rules in these areas. And we find it truly shocking that the Department of Business, Enterprise and Innovation currently operates under state aid caps that are self-imposed by the Irish state. And these were in place during the economic crash when businesses need to be supported. And these were still in place as many of those businesses over the course of the last couple of years were deeply affected by the uncertainty that Brexit presented, that currency fluctuations presented, and that those sectors were exposed to because of Brexit. So why, Minister, was that the case? And what the bill is missing, and what the government hasn't spelled out yet, is where is the flexibility in relation to state aid rules? The European Union needs to understand that the Irish economy is most exposed as a consequence of Brexit. If there's a hard crash, it is going to be a disaster for the Irish economy. We all accept that, and we all want to avoid as much as we can and do whatever we can to avoid a hard crash. And I still believe that it is the most unlikely outcome. But we could find ourselves in that position more by accident than by design. But we need Europe to step up to the plate, Minister, not just in relation to giving us protections in relation to the backstop, which is necessary and which we're thankful for, but they also need to give greater flexibility in relation to the application of the fiscal rules and also state aid rules, to allow you and your government to properly support, in very practical and tangible ways, the sectors of the Irish economy that will be most exposed. Last month, Taoiseach Sinn Féin launched a comprehensive Brexit contingency plan. And I must say, again, I was taken aback by the spokesperson for Fianna Fáil, who seems to think that it is their job to hold Sinn Féin to account for your failures. Every single time we hear Fianna Fáil make a speech, it's to attack Sinn Féin. You would think we were responsible for Brexit failures and problems in health and housing. But Fianna Fáil has produced no plan of its own. No Brexit contingency plan. They were relying almost solely on your plan, and yet they come in and critique it. We have launched a Brexit contingency plan because we know that you need to invest. You need to invest in capital spend. You need to invest in supporting businesses. You need to invest to make sure that exporters are properly protected. And you also need to invest to support the regions. All regions of this country, some of which will be deeply exposed, including the South East, as a consequence of Brexit. So Brexit will mean a structural change in the Irish economy. It is going to be one of the biggest market distortions to impact on Irish businesses. But you also need to understand that Brexit will not be solved by market solutions alone, Taoiseach. There needs to be state intervention, there needs to be state supports, and there needs to be investment. Where's the investment? Where's the additional capital spend in ports, for example? Where's the additional capital spend in public transport? Where's the additional hard, practical, tangible supports for businesses that need them? You're tinkering around the edges in relation to grants for research and development, and in some of those areas in relation to the bill for companies, and just going back and reverting to what our current state aid rules anyway. But there's no real hard practical proposals here, in my view, that will give the supports to businesses that are necessary. We have engaged and we have worked with a number of different stakeholders. We met with IBEC, we met with ISME, the Irish-British Chambers of Commerce, and they're all saying that what is needed is a loosening of state aid rules. They also say that what's missing from all of this is practical proposals for businesses. And they also recognise that you need to invest in the Irish economy. The only way you can protect the Irish economy from the worst effects of Brexit, Minister, is to invest. You're not investing any additional capital spend in public transport. We have ports, for example, that need to be supported. I gave you the example in the past of the ports in Rosslare and Waterford. There's also a need to invest in the ports in Cork, in your own constituency, in Shannon Fines and in other parts of the country as well, to ensure that every region in this state and every region on the island of Ireland is in a position to have connectivity with Europe if there is a hard crash. But there's nothing in this bill of substance that deals with any of those measures. So there needs to be an awful lot more, Minister, to protect the Irish economy. And I want to come back to the point, if I can, Minister, to the north and to the border. And I accept fully that we cannot deal with the very real mammoth challenge that a no-deal Brexit will create for people who use services either side of the border, businesses who use the all-island economy and depend on the all-island economy, and people who depend on accessing services north or south. People that we represent in the north, and despite what you might think from some of the voices from government and Fianna Fáil when it comes to the North. We represent the vast majority of nationalists. They vote for us because we understand where they're at and we understand their needs. That's why they vote for us. And we understand, Taoiseach, that they are very concerned about what will happen if there's a hard crash and what happens at the border. And yet we've had no inclination from the government as to what will happen. We know the obvious. World Trade Organization rules will kick in. We know there will be disruption. Everybody accepts there will be, in that scenario, a hardening of the border. But yet the government is putting its two fingers in their ears and saying that, pretending almost that it's not a problem. It is a problem, Minister. It's a very, very real problem. And you need to spell out to people who live either side of the border what will happen in that scenario. It's not good enough, Minister, to say that we can sort this out afterwards. You need to be giving people some sense as to what will happen. And again, I make the point that it's reasonable, it's responsible for politicians on the island of Ireland, in the event of a hard crash, to plan for the most obvious outcome if there is a hard crash, and that's a border poll on Irish unity. And I'll go back to that point again, Taoiseach. Why are you so afraid to have that discussion? Surely you will be aware of the opinion polls, which show that in the event of a hard crash, a majority of people in the north and a majority of people in the south would opt for the entire island staying in the European Union as part of a unified country with no border and the end of partition, rather than the chaos of continued partition and one part of the island inside the customs union and single market and one point outside. That's where the disruption will come from. That's where the chaos will come from. And there's an obvious way to end all of that disruption and end all of that chaos. So I want to end, Minister, by saying that we do welcome the publication of this bill. We do welcome the provisions which are necessary and which would be helpful to citizens who use services. We do accept that we have to plan for the worst case scenario. We are hopeful, and I want to acknowledge your contribution where you acknowledge the efforts of all those in opposition in terms of getting to a point where we had a withdrawal agreement and a protocol and an insurance policy for Ireland. That's what we want, Taoiseach. We want to avoid any hardening of the border. We wanted the withdrawal agreement to be passed. We want a solution that protects the interests of the people on this island. It doesn't suit anybody if we have a hard crash. It doesn't suit people in the north, it doesn't suit people in the south, and it doesn't suit people in Britain or in Europe either. But we have to plan for every eventuality. And we don't believe, Minister, that you have planned for every eventuality in relation to certain sectors of the Irish economy which need to be supported. So you do need to come up with more practical proposals for business. You do need to come up with more solutions for farmers. We're being promised, and you say it over and over again, that there will be protections coming from Europe, that Europe will give a package of supports to the farming community and to the agri-food sector. We haven't seen them. They haven't come, Minister Taoiseach. We have your bill, none of which deals with those issues, but they haven't come yet. So there's, but the point is this. The point is this, Taoiseach. We're very, very close to D-Day. This state and every member state is planning for a no-deal Brexit, and we're being told these are the contingencies. But we're also being told, on the other hand, that there might be some solutions down the road for the agri-food business and for farmers, but they haven't seen them. Nor have we seen any bespoke solutions for this state in relation to easing state aid rules. So Europe needs to do much, much more to protect the Irish economy. Not just the backstop, but the Irish economy as a whole. So we welcome the publication of this bill. We will work with the government and with the Taoiseach to get this bill done as quickly as possible. The 9 spokespeople for Sinn Féin in relation to the respective departments are working on putting down amendments and supporting the sections of the bill where we can. We will not delay the passage of this bill. We will support the bill as best we can to make sure it goes through as quickly as possible. But we're sincere, Taoiseach, when we say to you that it doesn't go far enough in many areas. It's underwhelming in terms of practical supports for the vulnerable sectors of the Irish economy. You need to do much more to make sure that whatever form Brexit takes, whether it's hard, whether it's soft, whether it's a hard crash or whatever form it takes, more supports are necessary, and those supports, unfortunately, Tánaiste, are not in this bill.